This is Dr. George and Dr. Larry, and this is Citizens Gone Wild. I wanted to ask a couple of questions to you folks. I see a lot of things in the news, and I'm puzzled as to why other things are not in the news. For example, there's continuous talk about climate change and how it's responsible for this, that, and the other thing. And I believe that's true. But I don't see stories like this. China has built over 3 times as much coal plant capacity as the rest of the world in 2020. I went back and I looked at the number of coal-fired plants that China is building and that India is building, and they're both building about 1 coal-fired plant per week. Does it matter if we do this, that, or the other thing, if someone is out there making, building coal-fired plant? And why doesn't that make the news, Larry?
Well, remember that this was all signed under the Paris Accord of 2015, where they basically said, yes, China and India and all you lesser developed countries, since we in the West had a head start over you, we're going to give you 15 years to catch up to doing the right thing. So I think that basically it's this generation's equivalence of the, what do you call it, when they had the parity agreement for naval vessels, the London Agreement of 1928, I think it was. So basically, China and India are rushing to build as many coal-powered plants as they can now while they can. And then in 2035 or 2030 or whatever it is, they say, oh, all right, we're now transitioning. Unfortunately, we cannot leave their atmosphere over China and over India and over Brazil, which is burning down the Amazon, and not have it affect us.
Well, I agree with you. I like your attitude, but I wonder if it makes for a full story. I mean, we're talking and talking and talking about controlling climate change, and here alongside of it is this.
All right, and what are we going to do about it? Are we going to march into China? Are we marching into India? I mean, the problem.
No, we're not going to do. I don't have anything to do about it, but I would think a full report on this issue would include something like that. That's all.
Oh, it should, but the point is, the news now, again, as we all know, is all the news we want to fit, not to print, not all the news that fit to print.
All right. Here's another tough one, though. Energy. Okay, we're all going electric cars, they say. Fine. I don't have one, but a lot of people do, and that's the way to go, apparently. But here's something I don't understand. Where does the energy to run the electric cars come from? Where's the energy to charge up the batteries, these giant batteries for the electric cars come from? I'm just curious. Where is that energy?
Guess what? It's still coming from natural gas and coal-powered plants. So we're only fooling ourselves.
Well, does it accomplish anything if the energy is made from coal-fired plants or natural gas over there and then fed into our cars over here?
No, but it makes you feel better.
Is that possible? That we're all...
Yeah, the only answer that we really should have in the United States, based on the technology we have now, based on what I've read, is that we have to go back to atomic power, but nobody's doing that.
Well, that's exactly what I was thinking. Where else can you get it except atomic power? And no one wants atomic power. So is it possible that most of mankind is delusional?
What do you mean possible? How about probable?
All right. I would just like to be in a position where I could interview the people who do the news on, let's say, CNN, and ask them these questions in a calm, deliberate way. We may have to hire someone, but there it is.
Do you think that they'd allow you to ask those questions?
Well, no, they won't.
Because it doesn't fit with the narrative.
It does. That's exactly it. There's a narrative, and we don't fit in with the narrative. But anyway, it's kind of a silly bit of business in the way we operate here. But mankind's been kind of silly for a while. One thing that comes up a lot when you are pro-Israel, which I am, is that people are always complaining on the internet that they can't criticize the Israeli government without being called an anti-Semite. And I came across this article which asked the question, how do you criticize Israel without being an accidental anti-Semite? And the answer is, confine your criticism to policies and action. Hold on here. This is one line that solves the problem for me. If you wouldn't say it about another country or ethnic group, it's not acceptable to say about Israel. And I'd like to take a little look with you, Larry, at the last war, at the war between Israel and Hamas in the Gaza Strip. And it seemed to me there was a very great violation of this rule. That is, people emphasized the killing, the deaths of children, and almost in a way to imply that Israel just arbitrarily and randomly chose to start a war in which children would be killed. It's well known that Israel goes to much more trouble than any other country in the history of the world to avoid civilian casualties. And yet, this was emphasized over and over and over again. The headlines continuously read, 5 children, 6 children, 7 children killed in war started by Israel. How do they get away with that nonsense?
Well, very simple, because if Israel may have won in many senses the physical war, but it has lost and continued to lose the psychological war, the public relations war. And, it's sort of like asking the question, when did you stop beating your wife?
Yes, it is. And it seems impossible. Again, I daydream about the idea that I could burst in on these people and say, is this the way you report all wars? And of course, the answer would be no. But I haven't been invited into any of
Well, wait a minute. Let's move it forward even a little bit. Did you see the video? Hezbollah recently sent 20 rockets or so into Israel. They sent it in from a Druze village. Did you see the video?
No.
The Druze villagers were physically attacking the Hezbollah people. 4 people drove up in what looked like a pickup truck that was loaded in the back with what looked like the old Katyusha rocket from the Russians. And they fired the rockets and then prepared to drive away. And the Druze villagers surrounded them and said, what the hell's going on here? I mean, you expect Israel to attack, us now that you launched from our village, get out of here. They started beating them up. We want you to go, if you want to go attack Israel, go attack it from your villages. Hezbollah, don't come to a Druze village.
It doesn't look as if a lot of the rules of the game are being
It's the same thing. There's one set of rules for them and one set of rules for us. And unfortunately, we in the decadent, stupid, politically blissful West think that we're fighting a war with people who think the way we do. And they don't, and they're not.
Do you think there's any hope that it might change, that they might be fair-minded and point out, for example, that the thousands of rockets were sent against Israel before they retaliated?
No, because the poor suffering Palestinian. I mean, unfortunately, when did this all pivot? After Biden came into office and after the Abrahamic Accords were pushed to the side, all of a sudden the Palestinian conflict came back to the fore, whereas last year was basically almost pushed to the edge of the table because Trump and Jared Kushner were making an end run around.
Amazing. It is so annoying. And I have an article, they often draw parallels between what Israelis do, as you've been saying, and what the Palestinians do. but it's totally different. Here's a headline: manslaughter charge for Israeli policeman who shot Palestinian man who had autism. Israel acts as good or better than any nation, especially in any nation under such conditions as the Israelis live under. Yes, Israelis do kill people, but if they kill them and it's not warranted, then they will charge someone and say that's a crime. And this Israeli policeman shot someone who had autism. I don't know, he didn't know he had autism at the time, but the Israelis feel bad enough about something like that they are actually going to charge this guy with a crime. That is very, very unusual here. Here's a plea by a black guy, Francis Book, in the Sudan. And he is in this country trying to rouse people to the fact that Muslims still have black slaves and they're wildly mistreated, and no one seems to give a damn, and he's kind of puzzled as to what's going on here. Muslims still own black slaves in 5 different North African countries, and yet nothing happens. He wants to know, basically, he's written some op-eds, and his basic question is, why don't those black lives matter? What do you think there, Larry? Why don't those black lives matter of blacks who are currently slaves?
Why? Because all are equal, but some are more equal than others. In other words, look, if we're such a, let's now talk about the United States for a minute, or even Israel. If they're such miserable, horrible, terrible countries, why are people trying to get into them?
Well, I agree with that, but I want to focus on this particular thing here. He says, human rights organizations are obsessed with the conduct of white Western people, which is what you said earlier. They have a storyline and they're sticking with it.
Exactly. It doesn't fit the storyline.
There's evil. Go ahead. You wanted to say anything?
You know, again, I got into a rather heated discussion with good friends of mine yesterday, who are everybody trying to look through the sins of the white world, 18th and 19th and 20th century, through the eyes of 20th to 21st century. And you can't look at history. You can say we did wrongs and we'd like to try to fix it going forward, but you cannot go through what we call the retrospectoscope and retroactively do mea culpas for all the things that were done.
What is it that makes it such a happy line? The line is that evil is with the West, evil is with white people, evil is with white men. And maybe it's just so soul satisfying to have a simple villain that you just don't want to change it regardless of the facts, regardless of any additional information that comes in.
Well, supposedly after you've atoned in Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and after you fasted during Yom Kippur, and you're fasted and you're tired and you're weak, but your soul is clean. Maybe this is the analogy for...
that's an interesting idea. No, really. I mean that. That is, if you take this leftist line, you can be saved very quickly. All you have to do is be against white people, white males especially.
Exactly.
And the West, that's it. You say something and you're done. You're done for today. You're a good person.
If a stranger, an alien being was to come down to the United States and look at what's going on now, they would think that the United States is majority ruled by minorities.
Yeah.
And not the other way around. But on top of which, the minority, if you're not the correct minority, you're marginalized also. Look at all the Asiatics.
The minority view, yes, the minority view is that America is fundamentally evil. White people are fundamentally evil. Western civilization is fundamentally evil. And it's almost impossible to get around that without discriminating against those groups. Here's an article.
If that was so good, how come the quality of life in Africa after all these many years, and there's been much, remember, much of Africa was freed in the 1970s from colonial rule. They don't look like they're doing so well in Africa for the most part.
No, but here's the thing, years ago, when the Nazis were first coming to power and it was still possible to say something, when they were trapped in a argument where they were losing the argument because of logic and facts, they would just turn around and say, look, we're different. We think with our blood. We think with our blood. And that's
I'm actually going to go a little further. When they were losing the argument by logic, they turned around and beat the crap out of you. That's what the essay was for.
Well, I understand that, but
now, wait a minute. The same thing is basically happening here. Jews fight with logic. Unfortunately, we can be logical all we want. We're not known, except for the IDF, for fighting back. And you cannot fight logic against a philosophy that basically, don't tell me, I've already made up my mind.
You're right. I might have mentioned this woman I know who works for ZOA, the Zionist Organization America, told me she was going up to the administration building on a local college, and a young black man was coming out. And the black guy looked at this woman and said, you know something? When you go up there, you carry a bunch of papers. When we go up there, we are going to disrupt things, and we're going to have a sit-in. And they both laughed, but it's absolutely true.
But it's true.
Here's something else that gets no attention, and I'd like to know why. Anti-Christian fury rises in Egypt. Now, the Christians in Egypt have had the crap beaten out of them now for several years.
You're talking about the cops, right?
The cops, yes. And these are the original Christians related to them in a way. And they talk about it, how they have attacked, churches are firebombed, people are have the hell beaten out of them, that sort of stuff. Women are screaming. They run into the church for protection. The government almost never shows up to protect them. And this is something to do with prejudice, surely, but it's like you said, it's not in the
Again, it doesn't fit the narrative.
It doesn't fit the narrative. I think that's going to have to be our line. It's a good summary. By the way, I have from time to time moments of peak idiocy. Well, they had an article in the paper about physics and mathematics and how even those areas of study have been twisted around to fit the narrative. And how can
you fit a, listen, I know there used to be Nazi science and Nazi physics and whatever, which is one of the reasons why they never got the atom bomb. But science is science, and until you've proven otherwise, it's immutable.
But here's what he says. This guy is a professor of physics at Hamilton College, and he says, at Hamilton College, we offer courses that teach students about social and structural hierarchies in the context of every discipline, including physics. How do you argue with someone like that? It doesn't even have enough logic to it so you can get hold of it and say anything. I'm beginning to think,
wait, what did Goebbels say, or Hitler, the big lie?
Yeah.
Well, here's a lie, and now you posit it as truth, and then you build on that.
Why this guy, let's see, his name is Kate Brown. All right. There's no arguing with it. I'm beginning to think that the most corrupt institution in America is higher education. There was this massive article in a blog called Minding the Campus about how the richest schools in the nation are selling worthless degrees, or they're giving worthless degrees. They have these degrees in these glamour-puss areas like film that put the average person in debt for about $180,000 for a master's degree. After 2 years after earning their master's degree, half the borrowers were making less than $30,000 a year. They'll never pay that
Listen,
back. And the only reason they went there is
George,
because it's Columbia.
George, the answer is when 20 years ago, when my kids were teenagers, my wife and I sat them down and said, here's the deal. You got to get a degree and get a job in an area listed in the New York Times. That's when the Times was still, okay, you can't get a job as a communicator. You can't get a job as a philosopher. You know, very few people are walking around holding Diogenes' lamp.
One of the best course I ever had anywhere was on the history of art at Rutgers University. It was a wonderful, wonderful course. You learn so much about civilizations through the ages, but it's not something that you could take and get a job with unless you want to be a professor of art history. And I don't know
which is why less people should go to college and more should go to trade schools.
That's what exactly is happening now, by the way. There's a trend in that direction.
Well, it should be.
There's another possible thing you can do is in Florida, you can major in, let's say, contracting or electricity or electrical contracting. So you get a 4-year degree, and at the end, you're a licensed electrician and you can get a job. Or you're a licensed contractor and you can get a job. That may be the way to go. But right now, there's so much baloney going on here where people are majoring in dance.
Well, women's study. Now, to be very crude about it, most guys used to major in women's studies. They sat around in the quad. We used to study them.
All right. Yeah. We're going to go back on track here. Here's one. The ignored genocide in Nigeria. Nigeria, by the way, probably the second largest group of people are evangelical Christians. You wouldn't know that from the news.
No.
But there are a lot of evangelical Christians, and they're basically getting their brains beaten out while the government puts its finger up its nose.
Now, wait a minute. They're getting beaten up by who? Muslims?
Yeah, by Muslims. All of these groups that come into a village and kill everybody, those are Muslims.
Oh, yeah.
And there are pictures here. I'm looking at a picture of about 15 graves that have been dug by Christians who were killed by Muslims.
And how come? Where are your sources of information, George?
This one is an article by Raymond Abraham. I'm not sure that I have to take it. Oh, it's with the David Horowitz Freedom Center.
Okay, how come you don't hear about this in the Washington Post and the New York Times?
I don't know. It's got everything you need: blood, death, and yet it's just not mentioned. They have been so effective. The other side, the anti-Western side, has been so effective in cutting off known sources. I mean, only people like you and I will see this picture of the dead Christian.
I have a dumb question to you. If this is so, and it started in the universities in the 1980s, maybe, as a reaction to Reaganism, that we're basically, that now the current generations are all being brainwashed. Does that mean that another 20 years from now, we will be either extinct or like the dodo put in a cage and exhibited?
You're absolutely right. There are still a few old-fashioned liberals left, but they're the older folks, and they're leaving. And at any rate, the curriculum is now designed by the younger leftist folks. So you can go through college and not even take a course in the Western civilization. Although, as you put it, that's what most of the world hungers for. They want Western civilization.
All right, so I have a question. If that is so, is it better to let have open borders and let immigrants in because maybe they will be the saviors since they're not all woke yet and they realize what they're escaping from?
It may well be. I have noticed that the blacks that come directly from Africa are on the right. They are definitely not on the left. They believe in every old-fashioned Western value, like family.
By the way, neither do the Haitians.
The Haitian, the Haitians as well. I want to end with one more thing on climate change because that issue is driving me nuts. Most of the headlines now are this: everything is caused by climate change. German village rethinks footprint after floods. At any rate, there's one article after another about climate change, and maybe there should be. But there's a guy, Bjorn Lundberg, who is a European, obviously, and he's been writing for many years saying he believes in climate change. He believes it's happening, but he believes that the effects are wildly exaggerated. For example, he says, according to him, it's mainly poor forest management, like failing to remove flammable undergrowth, that's causing a lot of the trouble. Now, Trump said something like this, which may have, damn that, but he has facts and figures in here. The area that burned in 2020 was only 11. The area that burned in 2020 was only 11% of the area that burned in the 1900s. In other words, we do have forests that are out of control, but they're burning much less land. Fewer people are dying.
Well, that's not necessarily true. I mean, the Dixie Fire in Northern California is the second largest fire in California history.
Yes, it is, but it doesn't kill anybody.
It burned down. It burned down a whole town just recently.
That was a while back. Yes.
No, just this past week.
Well, it did, but no one was killed there. I'm not saying
we're
that
able to get people out.
Okay. But what he's saying is that the amount of people killed by wildfire is lower than it used to be.
Well, wait, but that may be because we have better means of notifying people earlier. I mean, back in the day, back in the early 1900s, you didn't know you had a wildfire until it was basically on top of you. You couldn't get a phone call in, or you couldn't get.
I don't disagree with you. He doesn't disagree with you. He's just saying that the amount of damage should be looked at with a little bit of perspective, taking note of features such as you just mentioned.
All right, George, then I'm going to ask you a question about climate change. And I'm of two minds about it. But something's going on in the far west because of this huge drought that they have.
Right.
Which leads me to a bunch of questions. Number one, why is Tesla building a gigabyte factory to build new batteries in the desert in Nevada, where Las Vegas, Nevada was noted to be the most water starved metropolitan city in the United States so far? And number two, why isn't California, since Israel has made desalinization commercially possible and is using it, why isn't California, which has almost unlimited supply of Pacific Ocean water, why aren't they using desalinization?
No, I don't think they're going to ask that because he's made quite an investment there and in Arizona, and people don't question it when you come in with billions of dollars. That's why I think. He also says that the people are killed every year by cold waves as well as warm waves. People die of cold in this world, not in America, but all over the world. And he says the heat waves, the global warming reduces the cold waves. And so if you look at it in terms of lives lost, it's more or less starting to even out a little bit. And we should just keep that in mind here. That is, we shouldn't just rush hysterically to do something. We should take a look and see what is actually happening. And so far, the number of climate-related deaths have dropped. He says, if you look at it all over the world, I don't know if you want.
George, send me the reference. I want to look it up.
All right. Okay. I'll definitely do that.
Okay, George, I want to end with a quote.
Go ahead.
This is from George Orwell in the 1940s. Kind of chilling. Almost certainly, We are moving into an age of totalitarian dictatorships, an age in which freedom of thought will at first be a deadly sin, and later on, a meaningless abstraction. The autonomous individual is going to be stamped out of existence.
Wow. All right, that's a very good quote, although I look forward to a more cheering thought next time. Larry, it's a pleasure to talk with you.
It's a pleasure here too.